Welcome to the Proceedings podcast. I'm Bill Hamblett, the editor-in-chief at the U.S. Naval Institute. It's Tuesday, the 2nd of December, 2025. Good to have you on board, everyone. Mark your calendar for West 2026, the Naval Institute and AFCEA's annual Sea Service Conference in San Diego. This year's West will be 10 to 12 February at the San Diego Convention Center. The theme this year is Sustaining Maritime Dominance, Warfighting Readiness for the Future Fight. To find out more and to register, go to westconference.org. And just a reminder, West is free to all active duty military, and Naval Institute members get a big discount off the registration fee. Okay, a lot of you have been wondering where our ship store went, and the Naval Institute's ship store has been redesigned and is back and better than ever. For USNI hats, t-shirts, sweatshirts, tote bags, and more, go to usni.org and scroll to the bottom of the page, and you can click on Browse Our Ship Store. Great stuff for holiday giving. Naval Institute members get 20% off year-round. I'll say it again, Naval Institute members, and if you want to become a digital-only member, it's $45 for a year. You get 20% off everything in our ship store year-round. Okay, now let's get to my guest. Navy retired Admiral Chaz Richard is the author of an article in the December issue of Proceedings. It's titled, How Do You Know When You're Ready for Battle? And if you have the print magazine, you can find it on pages 10 and 11. Admiral, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Thank you for having me.
All right, in the interest of full disclosure, I just want to point out to our listeners that Admiral Richard is a member of the Naval Institute Board of Directors. That is a volunteer position, something he does as a public service. Sir, you were a career submarine officer. You served on active duty from 1982 to 2022. Your final tour was Commander, U.S. Strategic Command, in charge of the nation's nuclear arsenal. What was that job like? Tell us something most people probably don't know about that position and its responsibilities.
Well, Bill, one, I consider myself very fortunate to have had the opportunity to have served for so long, particularly with the amount of time at STRATCOM. So I was a commander in the time period you mentioned, but I also had two other flag tours there. So I spent pretty close to 7 years at STRATCOM. So deeply immersed in that mission. Of course, that comes at the expense of others. You know, a couple of things that make STRATCOM unique among the combatant commands. A big one is our focus on deterrence. And my experience is that deterrence and warfighting are two different things. They often get confused. The example I'll give you could probably be its own podcast, but a lot of opposition I see to the nuclear sea launch cruise missile inside the Navy stems from confusion between warfighting and deterrence. Two different things related. But the one big one that I think would be of interest to you and perhaps others is STRATCOM, because of the unique nature of its mission, has the vast majority of the Department of War's high readiness forces. That over half the strategic forces are maintained on a day-to-day alert status, immediately executable within minutes of an order of the president, which requires that the mission be executed from headquarters. Very unique command and control. You don't delegate to your components. All your components do are making forces available to then be presented via STRATCOM to the National Command Authority, and they're executed skip echelon from the president directly to the firing unit. That's a very unique chain of command. And as much as I am a fan and a proponent of mission command, particularly being a submariner, STRATCOM is the antithesis of that. It's positive control in a way that's pretty unique in the military. You could almost think of STRATCOM as the president's component. Over.
Yes, sir. Thanks for laying out that major difference. Especially there's so much talked about these days about mission command, and that point that the U.S. nuclear forces can't operate as mission command. They have to be very tightly, directly controlled. I also think I enjoyed your point about the fact that your component commanders under STRATCOM, their job was not to execute actual operations, but to prepare forces for that order that would come down. And I also picked up on your point that 50% of those forces have to be ready all the time, 24/7. So, sir, this article that you wrote is titled, How Do You Know You're Ready for Battle? It started with some comments you made a couple of months ago during a Madison Grand Strategy Project First Wednesday Sea Power Workshop. And so that's something that we're now recording those and putting them on our YouTube channel the first Wednesday of every month. The speakers were two wargaming instructors out at the Naval Postgraduate School. And during the Q&A, you chimed in about how much you valued war games, particularly when you were a 4-star commander. So I just want to start there. How often did you and your staff at STRATCOM conduct war games?
Yeah, so Bill, there's a variety of things that qualify for this, but STRATCOM, as a headquarters, executes over 400 exercises per year. It's actually more than one per day, right? Every watch section on the in the watch center, in the Global Operations Center, is going to conduct a exercise of some sort. Then on top of that, you have the certification events. You have two major tier 1 exercises that last about 10 days each. And STRATCOM stops doing everything else to go into those. There's additionally joint staff led exercises that are conducted that I participated in. And then there is a full battle staff exercise 1 to 3 times a week that is led by a GOFO, a general or flag officer, the deputy commander, your J3, your J5. And I participated in about 2 per quarter on those exercises personally to try to maintain my own skills. The Airborne Command Post is going to do an exercise that involves the headquarters every time they're up on alert. The alert bird is going to do that. So there's this constant flow of exercises that's at a pace that I hadn't seen in any other command.
And you write, but even with all this, as a 4-star, I did not do anywhere near the amount of exercising against a thinking opponent at battle speed with consequences for my decisions to test the plan and procedures that the battle staff and subordinate commanders and I needed. So looking back on it, you would have done more. And I want to ask, what would you have given up to do more wargaming? Because there's only so many hours in a day, right?
Right. And so that aspiration to do 2 per quarter kind of fell off over time, right? And that's where the article gets into the reasons for that. And the one that started it is, it's just hard to go do those things, right? That's going to be an intense 4 or 5 hours. You can make mistakes and you're going to get called out for it, right? And there's this presumption that you're the commander. You're supposed to be the best person in the command at going to do this. And you may show up and go, yeah, that's how we did it a year ago. Joint staff changed the procedures. You're not up to date, right? And so there's a pressure just internally to go, I'm good. I've got, we'll let somebody else take care of that. And you have to overcome that in order to maintain your proficiency.
Yeah, that's a really key point, right? The more senior you get, I think there's a tendency to get carried away with the tyranny of the inbox, I guess, is one, but also, a real exercise against a difficult, challenging scenario and a thinking adversary can get uncomfortable, right? And if people see the boss, hey, he missed that opportunity, or he missed that decision, or didn't know the procedure correctly, yeah, that can get real uncomfortable.
Yeah, Bill, and I didn't really fully answer your question. You asked me, what would you have given up, right? Well, I'm a nuke submariner, so the answer would have been, well, I'd have just worked harder, right? Maybe I didn't need 8 hours worth of sleep, but and obviously, looking back on it in hindsight, a part of it, and I have found it's amazing the number of things inside the Navy, and that really don't change from being a junior officer all the way up to a 4-star. And it's so some of the things that, pulled you away are no different when you were back in 05 command on the ship or the squadron or the boat. And you're going to take your battle stations team up to the trainer at 1300, but squadron calls down at 11 and the Commodore wants to see all the COs up in their office. And so the XO is going to slide in and try to take your place in the trainer. but the maintenance facility calls and says, we're bringing the drain pump back today instead of tomorrow because another boat broke and we got to free up shop. You remember all of that tension. Again, this could probably be another podcast, but I remember talking to some of our other combatant commanders about how we're just awash in bureaucracy inside the Department of War. And that eventually what you got to do to free up time is just start saying no to taskers. We're not the droids you're looking for. Y'all go, staff, y'all go handle that. We have to get ready for our primary mission. I started doing some of that towards the end. I wish I'd started earlier.
That's a great point. Yeah, just what am I actually going to do today, right? What I got time for 10 things, and I've got 25 things on my list. You got to prioritize, and you can't let the inbox or other people, constantly prioritize your time. You give 3 subtle reasons why senior commanders can get distracted from participating in those major exercises and war games. We talked about this a little bit, but the first one is that they're hard and they're uncomfortable. Could you just unpack that a little bit more? Maybe give an example of when you were a 3 or a 4-star and there was a scenario and you were like, oh, you're as my aviators friends would say, you might be holding on to the vertical stabilizer, trying to get back in the cockpit, right? Holding on.
Yeah. So Bill, and that's the risk. Anytime you bring a sailor on board, he's going to tell you sea stories, right? And so I'm trying not to just completely mess up the show with that. But when I say that they're uncomfortable, I mean, I can give you a time the Joint Staff is there doing a certification event, right? We have to be annually certified. Nothing changes, right? A third party's got to come in and give you the blessing.
Right.
They gave us this close to 6-hour scenario that stepped us through every possible permutation of a particular warplane, and in a way that you could argue isn't even credible in the real world. And you asked them later, asked the captain, what were y'all doing? It's like, oh, we never had a 4-star doing this. We just wanted to see what you would do, right? So trying to keep up with all the possible, factors, things you got to present. Deterrence isn't very well understood. So you have to be very practiced and crisp in explaining the logic of the plan, the logic of deterrence, how you restore deterrence to people like a Secretary of War or a chairman of the Joint Chiefs that don't think about this every day like you do. There's a whole art in how you describe all of these things. And the good news is I had done this as a 1-star in 2 separate tours. I had done it as a 3-star. I had several hundred of these under my belt, but it changes. And if you're not careful, you'll start defaulting back to the way we did it 2 years ago, not today. And then another piece, Bill, that I tried to emphasize in the article is this point about thinking opponents, right? That this is not a scripted event. Your opponent has been studying you for years, right? They think they have advantages over you, or they wouldn't have started something to begin with. You might get surprised. I was always trying to see if I could smoke out what war reserve mode should I be prepared for? What capability that our intel missed do I have to have thought about ahead of time not to catch me? And so if you make a mistake, they will capitalize on it. You mentioned earlier, I am from Alabama, so everything's a football analogy. And you come in with a game plan, but your opponent is going to react to the way the game is going, and they have their plan also. That's very different from simply executing a script to make sure you can do a procedure.
Yeah. At STRATCOM or at other commands that you served at, sir, did you feel like in exercises and in war games that you had a realistic thinking adversary? And as an intel guy, I've often been on that side of the table. I've often played red. So I'm just kind of asking, did you feel like, those folks who were playing the red side, that they knew what they were doing? They had studied adversary tactics, whether it's China, North Korea, Russia, Soviet Union, et cetera. And they were presenting that threat picture and presenting red moves to you in a realistic kind of stressful scenario.
Bill, for STRATCOM, Yes, and you notice my Stratcom pride comes through. Other jobs, right? I was a submarine force commander, which meant I was an ASW task force commander for the Atlantic, Western
Yeah.
Atlantic under Northcom. No, I don't think I had a realistic op for. At Stratcom, you've got this giant J7. It's a holdover from Strategic Air Command days. So you've got people who have been playing the roles basically of not only your president, your secretary of war, your chairman, but they have studied the intel. They are up to date. They have looked at the degree war games that Stratcom sponsors with Naval War College. They have read the results of the Global Thunders and the Global Lightnings that you do. They're very practiced in presenting up to date our best understanding of Russian or Chinese or North Korean doctrine. So you have a very good in-house op for at Stratcom. I worked really hard in my time as a submarine force commander to try to get the opposing force presentation up to that level for the fleet, my piece.
On a related note, that reminds me, we have an article coming in the January issue, which is always surface warfare focused, and a surface warfare commander who's XO of a DDG is recommending that the surface Navy create an aggressor squadron to match something that's relatively new in the submarine force. And I'm wondering if it started maybe when you were the submarine force commander, that AGRON, the aggressor squadron, which was created in the last 10 years, I think, to get after that problem, right? To up the reality, the realistic nature of the training against an adversary, particularly for submarines that are going through their certification periods.
Yes, the I started the Agron, and again, this is a sea story. I mean, where did that all start? When I was the deputy, my aide, call sign Gramps, was an FA-18 Hornet pilot who had been an aggressor. And so he was telling me what that was like. So I shamelessly stole the idea from Naval Aviation, who's been doing it for a very long time, and said,
Right.
I need something like that. And it's not just, hey, they know how to get the red forces, role, the boats that are playing the aggressor at sea. There was a whole lot of work in just standardizing threat presentation across all of your training centers, right? When you went
Yep.
and audited that wasn't we room for improvement, we'll say. So but that idea was shamelessly stolen from Naval Aviation.
So, Admiral, the second half of your article gets at the need and some ways to test and assess senior officers, admirals and generals for high command. You point out very well, and you've said it here, rising up through the XO, department head XO, commander or captain level, those qualifications for command and for specific sea duty jobs, TAO, for example, are quite specific. But when you get to higher level command, when you get to flag officer command, it's not so, right? And so it can be like, well, this guy's done well as a 05 command, as an 06 command, so therefore he's going to be a good admiral, right? But then you get to be an admiral, and the training, it can vary, or it can be you can hit it at a time maybe where it's not so rigorous. There can be some inertia to a career, and maybe you're not actually tested, right? So how would you change that? What are some ways to get after change that, and do you see that those changes happening?
Yeah, so Bill, that's a part of the article that, to be honest with you, in retrospect, I wished I had written more, right? In terms of providing more specifics in terms of what I was thinking. I'll answer the easier half first in terms of ways that we can better allow a serving senior commander to practice.
Okay.
Because it is just really hard to set the exercises up at the flag level because you've got components that have to be brought in. The number of things you have to simulate between your relationship with the other combatant commanders, your relationship back to the Pentagon, press things that you don't worry too much about as an O5, going through and what's Department of State doing, right? I mean, there's
Yep.
a ton of this stuff that's really hard to simulate. I think AI offers us a real new opportunity to get better at this, right? Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab is doing some great work on AI emulation of red, blue, green, that you can almost get to the point where you can set up an AI emulation just for the commander, where you have high fidelity actors acting as if they were your components, acting as if they were the Joint Staff or OSD, and the way I envision that, I used to have a study period once a week for an hour or two where I would lock myself in the office with the references, with the nuclear decision handbook, with the emergency action procedures, and study those. I'd have loved to have had a box where you could have given me a scenario and I step through orders, recommendations, play it out over and over and over. That one looks like an exciting place where technology can help us get those sets and reps. The other piece gets back into, Bill, in terms of, well, how do I evaluate an officer's potential down these lines? I mean, we already have some ways to do that, but I think it at least needs to be strengthened and specifically called out in a fitness report, so it is available to a selection board or a nominating group that we can specifically go look at how well we do in that. And if we have to modify what we have admirals do to give us better insight, I think we have to do that. Again, this is a very niche example. I informally set a requirement that because the submarine force carries the bulk of the Navy commitment to the strategic forces, that all submarine admirals had to qualify airborne emergency action officer. That's the flag or general that is on the looking glass command post, which means you are now fluent in the plan, you are fluent in the procedures, you know how to be the military representative, what's called the designated nuclear expert, to the National Command Authority, including the president, even if you weren't going to a job that required you to stand that watch, that you needed that training and we needed to evaluate you in your ability to go do that, independent of what your job assignment was. You could see where we could do in other areas. Bill, I think we have a weakness at the operational level of war, just across the board in our PME, that we're very good at the tactical level. And that's why you get all the sets and reps. But what we tend to do to you in our education processes is jump you to the strategic level. So you go from being a very good squadron commander or ship CO or something like that, and next we got you qualified to be a member of the National Security Council, and we have overlooked, how do I get you ready to command at the task force, task group, fleet level, where you're commanding multiple platforms instead of just your own, or advising the national security advisor? This would start to help fill in that hole, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that picks up on a lot of themes that we've seen in proceedings over the last couple of years. The need to be prepared to fight from the maritime operations centers, right? And so that's an operational level of war command and control facility, whether it's at a numbered fleet headquarters or on a numbered fleet command ship, for example. But yeah, you're not the first one to say that, sir, that there's kind of a gap, and that we do a great job tactically. And for some of our junior listeners who think, a carrier strike group, for example, is, a strategic asset, in some ways it is, but that is still tactical decision making, right? When you're a carrier strike group commander as a 1-star, that's a tactical formation. It's not an operational or a strategic formation. And so all the way up through carrier strike group training, even there's pretty rigorous exercises, but then it gets harder. As you point out, it gets harder for a lot of reasons. It gets more complex, and the interplay at very high levels, as you said, with your component commanders, with your higher headquarters, with the joint staff, and replicating all that in an exercise, it's really challenging.
So the strategic example is, okay, great, you're a submariner. You understand how boomers work. That's 1/3 of the triad. Now you
Yeah.
got to get up to speed on how you employ or make ready bombers and the ICs. That's a whole different world you don't have any experience in. Being an ASW task force commander, yeah, I understood what the boats did really well. Hey,
Right.
what is this MPA thing you've given me? How am I going to do that, right? What about these destroyers, right? It's a whole new world. Now, you're not going to be able to go into CIC on one of them, but you do have to understand it enough to know how they're going to contribute, how to use them and not waste them. That's that operational piece that or wherever you came from isn't going to completely cover it.
Yes, sir. That's a really, really important point and a good point. Well, we're running close to the end of time. I just want, and this is great. Maybe we can do another follow-on podcast sometime soon. There's just so much to kind of pull apart here, but I think we hit all the major points. Before we sign off, any saved rounds from you, sir?
No, Bill, other than I applaud what you and the Naval Institute staff does in terms of allowing forums like this to let us have debate and try to advance our craft and profession. Thank you for that.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. My guest today has been retired Navy Admiral Chaz Richard. He's the author of an article in the December Proceeding. It's titled, "How Do You Know When You're Ready for Battle?" You can find it by going to usni.org and just search on the title or search for Chaz Richard, and it'll come up. Admiral, thanks again for being on the show today, and I hope you'll write for us again soon.
All right. Thanks, Bill.
Okay, a reminder to register for our West Conference 2026, 10 to 12 February in San Diego. Go to westconference.org, all one word, westconference.org, for more information and to register. We look forward to seeing you there. If you like the show, ring the bell, subscribe, tell a friend. Until next episode, remember, victory begins at the Naval Institute.